So we want to welcome again everybody to tonight's presentation on becoming a meteorologist. I'm Joe Deli Carpini, the Science and Operations Officer, which is a fancy title for the guy that manages the science program, the research and training for the staff. And with me, two of our regulars, Bryce Williams, who's one of our meteorologists and manages our social media program, and Rodney Chai, one of our meteorologists, who does a lot with our climate program, among other things. So Bryce and Rodney will be taking turns presenting with me tonight. So I'm going to get us started off, and why don't we start with what is meteorology? Because sometimes people get a little bit confused. They think we deal with things like meteorites and space junk and stuff like that, but it's really just the science of the atmosphere. And the name comes from the Greek word meteoron, which is something that happens high in the sky. Aristotle is actually considered the father of meteorology, and his book, written in around 340 BC, was the first major study of the atmosphere. So meteorology has its roots in ancient Greece. So then what is a meteorologist? Well, it's actually an official term, not just a weatherman or weather person. There's actually a definition from the American Meteorological Society, which defines a meteorologist as a person with specialized education who uses scientific principles to explain, understand, observe, or forecast the Earth's atmospheric phenomena and or how the atmosphere affects the Earth and life on the planet. So a little more definition than just a guy that predicts the weather. So what can meteorologists do? And we'll address this a little bit throughout the presentation tonight. Lots of different places for job opportunities. Probably the largest is the federal government, in particular the National Weather Service, who we work for. Also, some state governments hire meteorologists. Many private companies hire meteorologists, including broadcasting is one section of that. Universities teaching. There's a lot of university programs that offer meteorology, so we need professors to teach students. A lot in atmospheric research and things like air pollution. Also emergency management, that's becoming a larger employer these days. More with our relationship with emergency management, it helps for a lot of cities, towns, and primarily states to have a meteorologist on staff. Town and city planning is one area. We've actually gotten a little bit involved in that with regards to things like climate, looking at the impacts from climate change. In particular here in Massachusetts, rising sea levels. We work with a lot of the city planners in Boston and Cambridge, looking at things like not just things like increasing storm surge and flooding, but also heat waves. In addition, so there's a lot of different things, ways for towns and cities to kind of mitigate the impacts of hazardous weather. And then, of course, aviation is a big part of hiring meteorologists, and because weather really has a significant effect on aviation. If you've had your flight delayed, you know what I'm talking about. So, where do meteorologists work? So this is interesting statistic here. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were almost 10,000 meteorology jobs in the U.S. in 2019. And as it says there, the U.S. government is the largest employer of meteorologists in this country. Not just us at NOAA and the National Weather Service, but all military branches, the Department of Defense, FEMA, even NASA. Weather conditions are critical. If you're a fan of watching SpaceX launches, you know that weather is critical to that. Also the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture. And as I mentioned, the state and local governments also, they employ meteorologists. So just, again, talking about where else do meteorologists work, some other things in addition to private industry and TV and radio stations, commodity brokers, that's a very big area for meteorologists to work, futures, things like that, and environmental companies, air pollution. The latter two there are kind of more expanding markets for meteorologists these days. So let's start off for elementary school. If you know someone who's an elementary school student who really likes weather and thinks it might be a career, well, what do you want to? What kind of courses you want to take? Science and math are probably the most important. You take, get as interested as you can, take as much as you can, and obviously elementary school, it's one science class, one math class, but those are going to be the building blocks for courses down the road in high school and certainly in college and maybe even graduate school. Computers are very much a skill that you need to have these days. Most of our work is done on computers now. Not just with the computer models, but actually the day-to-day forecasting is all done on computers. We forecast graphically. We do graphical forecasts, which we have formatters that spit them out into words. So, back in the day when my career started about 30 years ago, it was typing all the forecasts out by hand, and now it's all automated. We graphically show rain and snow and high temperatures and low temperatures, and we have computer programs that kind of print out the forecast for us. And English is, something that people don't think about, but you have to be a good writer in meteorology. Get your thoughts across, whether it's in forecasting, like a forecast discussion, or maybe a research paper if you're into research. Spelling as well; those are important things to do. So, elementary school, you want to kind of get it all, but really, not just science and math. Computers are great, and of course, English is an important part too. And also, a second language too, Spanish, Portuguese. We have segments of our populations here in southern New England where that's the primary language. So there is a need to be able to communicate with those who don't speak English as their primary language. So moving on to high school, this is where you can get a little more selective, but again, you still want to take all the science that you can, starting with earth science if it's offered, chemistry, physics, geography. My recommendation is whatever science you can get, take it. Same goes for math. Not always the most fun part of it, but algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and certainly calculus. Calculus is something that you will go on into college. Computer science, as I mentioned, with computers being our primary way of communicating and receiving information these days. And as far as English, continued development of writing skills are important, and also it's a good idea to start some public speaking. What we do in the National Weather Service is we brief emergency managers. Nowadays, it's by video, but also sometimes by phone. But we brief anyone from a town emergency manager all the way up to the governor of Massachusetts or Connecticut or Rhode Island. So you want to be someone who can speak clearly and simply, and not get too bogged down into scientific terms and things like that. So always good to be well versed in public speaking. Now, something I will do a little advertisement here for our CocoRAS, which is our Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. I always encourage students in elementary school, especially, and even in high school, participate in what's called citizen science. This is a great way to do science and math at home, something the whole family can do. You just need to get a rain gauge to get started, and you can go to the website there, cocoras.org. You can order the rain gauge on the site there. It's about $30, and it ships right away. You get a rain gauge, you sign up and register, and you can start reporting. But really, it reinforces some good science and math skills. You learn how to read a rain gauge, as you see there on the right. Report using decimals, observing weather. You can calculate monthly totals, yearly totals. You compare the rainfall in your town with another town in the state or another part of the country. So this is a great way for students in elementary school and even high school or middle school to get on board. In CocoRAS in southern New England here, we have about a half a dozen schools that participate. One is ranging from all the way on Nantucket to out in Fitchburg and parts of Connecticut. So again, this is something I highly recommend. If you have someone who's got an interest in weather, get a rain gauge and have them measure and report. It's really good information, and it's also data that we use at the National Weather Service, not just here, but the Albany office and the New York office. We use it in real time when we have storms, and we also use it for drought and flood assessment. So as many of you know, we're currently in drought conditions. These rainfall reports are critical to helping us determine what level of drought we need to go into. So good way to do science and math at home. Okay, end of the commercial. So on to college and graduate students. Typically what you want to do in college or undergraduate is a bachelor's degree. It can be in meteorology, atmospheric science, or any of the physical sciences. As you know, with high school, any courses in computer science and journalism are helpful. Again, reinforces those writing skills. The military is also an option for education. Any branch of the military has a meteorology program. In southern New England, I know the Coast Guard Academy down in New London, Connecticut offers that. These days, not just a four-year bachelor's degree, but many students are coming out with a master's degree. That wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago, but now it seems like most students are going on to get their master's degree. It's not a requirement necessarily, but it can certainly help, enhance your education. While in college, three things that are really important that we've highlighted here. Be involved in other activities. Don't just limit yourself to meteorology and math and computer science. Do other things. Join clubs. Do maybe intramural sports. Look for leadership activities. Most schools have a meteorology club or organization. Run for an office in that. But anything really. It could be with a religious organization, a service organization. These are things that will help set you apart when you're looking for a job after graduation. And certainly go to conferences. Obviously with COVID now things are virtual, but these are great opportunities for networking and learning about new research, new technology. But I would say that networking is probably the biggest part, and Bryce and Rodney can really back me up on that. You get to meet people from either, who are meteorologists now, and name recognition is huge when it comes to applying for a job. If somebody knows you, that's a certain, plus for you to get a job. And really, the one thing I always tell students who always ask me is, gain experience while you're in school. Volunteering, or internships, even if they're not paid. These are important things. You want to get experience. So that really helps you stand out, because I tell the students, everybody has the degree, the piece of paper when they come out of college, but what do you have above and beyond that? Well, someone who's been volunteering with maybe a TV meteorologist, or volunteering at a National Weather Service office, or doing work with an emergency manager, that's stuff that sets you above other, the competition really when it comes for jobs. So those three things are really very important in both college and graduate school. So, do other activities, make yourself well-rounded, go to conferences as much as you can, and just gain that experience while you're still in school. Don't wait until you're out of school to go and try and get that experience. It's much more difficult. So do these things while you're still in school. So just to show a quick map across the country of some of the universities that offer degrees in meteorology, there's a number of them here in the Northeast, but pretty much anywhere around the country you can go. Blue dots indicating undergraduate, red graduate, and purple for both. There's certainly a wide variety of places to go to study. Some people like to stay here in the Northeast. Others will go to the plains to study. They like severe weather. Some go to Florida because they like hurricanes. But really, you have a lot more choices, these days than even, I'd say, 30, 40 years ago, as far as universities that offer degrees in meteorology. And usually a simple online search can certainly help you with that. And for high school students, obviously your guidance department can also steer you in the right direction. So with that, I believe, Rodney, you are taking it here on career choices, if I remember correctly.
Yes, Joe, thank you so much. So, Joe made a great point about networking, and I cannot emphasize enough the importance of networking. Because just like applying for any jobs, it's not so much of what you know is important, but who you know is even more important. And as you look at this career choices, there are so many different types of jobs in meteorology, and one of the most important advice I give people is you need to be really flexible, and sometimes the path that you take may not be what you envision, and when you look back at your career, maybe 10, 20 years from now, and I'm not at that stage yet, but you will find that the path you have taken may be very different from what you envision it to be initially. So just a quick rundown of the different types of meteorology or jobs you can get in the field. A little bit about my background. My first job was actually with the Navy, and in the climatology division. So technically it's a meteorologist job, but it was really more of climatic data support. So, and it's just to distinguish between climate and weather. So climate is more about averages and long term. So if you think about 30 years average, that's traditional climate normal. A lot of times when we say, oh, the temperatures are well above normal, we compare it against climatic normal. Weather is what's going to happen in the next few hours, next few days. And when you look at your phone, you pull up your weather app, you listen to the forecast on TV. That's the TV meteorologist. They're the public face. It used to be the case whereby the TV meteorologists, some of them don't necessarily have a degree in meteorology, but nowadays almost everyone has a degree. And but the cool thing about the National Weather Service, and Bryce will talk about it later, is if you want to be an operational meteorologist for the National Weather Service, you get to issue warnings, like winter storm warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings, and of course before that you need to be radar certified before you can take on this important responsibility to issue warnings. And then those are the warnings that pop up on your phone. And so I've talked about operational meteorologists. They are basically the weather forecasters, climatologists, and then there are some other, there's environmental meteorology. Meteorology is atmospheric science, so you look at the science of how air particles flow around the atmosphere, and really the atmosphere. I mean, for meteorologists, most of the time we focus on the lowest part of the atmosphere, up to 30,000 feet, but the atmosphere, goes up to space. And so there are meteorologists who specialize in different parts of the atmosphere. So, there's so many different options, and that's why it's so important to be flexible. So where do you want to work? A lot of people coming out of college, they want to go work for the National Weather Service. I mean, it's a very cool place to work, but the competition is very strong, and that's when you have dozens of candidates applying for one position. You may be an excellent candidate, and you may have an excellent interview, but it's just by luck. I mean that you don't make the selection, and it is so important to number one, you need to be relentless and persevere in your pursuit of your ultimate goal, but then at the same time you want to be flexible. So for me, I went to University of Kansas for my master's, and initially when I started applying for National Weather Service, I did not even make the interview round because I was missing a couple of classes. Physics 101 was one of them, and later on I will tell you why I did not take Physics 101 in college. And then, so it was like, but then the Navy offered me an interview, and then I kind of went from there and took the climatology path, and then eventually found my way to National Weather Service. So that's why it's so important to be flexible and be prepared to work in other parts of the country where you don't envision yourself to be, and then eventually make your way back to the office of your preference down the road. And you can also start off with the private sector. TV station is the most obvious option, but then the private sector, like Joe mentioned, there's aviation meteorologists. I mean, all the major airlines, they have meteorologists. You think about investment companies that trade futures. It's important to know what the weather is going to be like, and that would affect commodity prices. And then also, you can also work for the Department of Defense. I myself, I started with the Navy. And also, there's also forensic meteorologist, and that's more for management consulting, and ideally should have some interest in legal stuff. So talking about professional certification, that's more of further down the road, maybe 5-10 years after you started as a meteorologist. Having the seal of approval from NWA, National Weather Association, or being certified by the American Meteorological Society, AMS, can help you advance your career and open more doors. But ultimately, it is really important. It's not so much of what you know, but who you know in the field, and but it will help with professional certification down the road if you want to get higher in the career path. So talking about training, I started at the National Weather Service more than a year ago, and I'm still doing a lot of training. And Joe is the Science and Operations Officer, and he's the primary person to assign training to all the staff in the office. And you can be working for 30 years, but then there's always new things to learn. And so the training doesn't stop after the first 12 to 18 months. It is a lifelong process. And some people think about, National Weather Service is a government job, and, there might be the stigma or stereotype, for better or for worse, that the job is stable and it doesn't really change much. You cannot be more wrong, because, like Joe mentioned, 20-30 years ago, he used to type up the forecast by hand. Now everything's computerized, and you need to have a pretty advanced knowledge of the computer, and even better still, you have some knowledge of GIS or programming. It can certainly help you with your further down the road and open the door to more possibilities. And Joe also mentioned emergency management is a very important aspect of operational meteorology now. We talk about becoming a weather-ready nation. It's issuing the forecast is only the first step. Communicating the forecast to people who can act upon the forecast and make important decisions, that's the rest of the steps. Because ultimately you produce a forecast, you want someone to be able to use it to safeguard life and property, and keep the economy going. So there's so much training to be done, but if you're passionate about meteorology, you can get through this training. It is so important just to be relentless and work really hard. So applying for a job in meteorology, I would, broadly speaking, there's the private sector and the public sector, the government. So the one important thing I would point out when you apply for a job for the National Weather Service, or really any federal government jobs, the people will tell you in the private sector the resume or CV can only be 1 page long. When you apply for a government job, that resume can be a few pages long, 5-6 pages long. And the reason for that is because the HR agency who's responsible for looking through the applications in the first stage, they really want you to elaborate on your accomplishments. And that means sometimes you really need to hit the keywords and explain the small things that you have done. Even they may seem small to you, every accomplishment help you to differentiate yourself from another candidate. And so I highly encourage you, if you are interested in applying for a National Weather Service job, or know someone who wants to work for the NWS, reach out to us, or or a local office of your choice, and include a cover letter in your application, and have someone look through your application and give you the advice, because it's a different ball game versus applying to a TV station. You may be ranked number one when applying for a TV station, but you may not even make the interview round if you apply for a government job, just because the rules are different, and the people looking at the application have different criteria. So it's really, really important to make sure you know the rules of the game before you play it. So I believe this is the last slide before I pass it on to Bryce, and I cannot emphasize enough, you need to be prepared to work hard. There are some jobs in meteorology that is 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, but if you want to work for the NWS, it is 24/7, and you need to be prepared to be a team player, and everyone will get their fair share of midnight shifts. Some people call it the junkyard shift, but I would say I would put it out there. If you or someone whom you know wants to work for the National Weather Service, you need to be prepared to work midnight shift. If you're not prepared to work midnights, then you may want to look for another job in meteorology. And just there are perks of working midnights too. Maybe you have to go to the grocery store or go hiking on a weekday when there's less people. And also, besides working hard and being flexible, be sure to be mentally prepared to work in a variety of environments. If you like winter weather, you should apply to offices that can offer you winter weather to forecast. And also, be sure to have a rigorous background in math and science, and nowadays increasingly computing skills or programming skills. And last but not least, know how to work effectively in a team. So ultimately, it's a tight-knit group of people you're going to work with, and you're not going to be selected if the interview panel thinks that you are not going to be a good partner for working midnight shifts with. So, the knowledge is important, but people skills are just as important. So, now I'm going to pass it on to Bryce, who's going to talk about working for the National Weather Service.
Thank you, Rodney. All right, so now I'll get into a little bit of the specifics of working where we work, because we have a lot more experience than that. So just to start off, kind of as we've alluded to before, we are basically what you think of as the behind the scenes. So most people think of meteorologists as being on TV. That's actually just a small fraction of the meteorology jobs out there. And so working for the National Weather Service means that we are watching the weather 24/7, 365. So as Rodney said, that means that if you work for the Weather Service, you will be working rotating shifts. So nights, weekends. I mean, I'm on night shifts this week, in fact, and I'm working Thanksgiving. So some things come with a trade-off. You've got to be passionate about the job, and if you are, then it's totally worth it. But just know that getting in. And so how it works is the Weather Service is a government organization. So the pay scale is the general service scale, GS scale is what it stands for. I could be wrong on that, but the GS scale. And so you would be hired as an entry-level meteorologist first, and that would put you at a 5, 7, or a 9, depending on your level of education. If you have a master's degree, or if you already have several years of experience in the field somewhere, you could start higher than a 5, maybe a 7 or a GS9, and that's just referring to the salary. And so then once you start there, you can work your way up and be promoted to a GS11 and a GS12. And so that basically happens once you've had several years under your belt in the Weather Service and you get enough experience that you can take on some more responsibilities. So yeah, 3 actually probably like 2 to 5 years, you can get up to a GS12 level. And a lot of people are, that's where they remain for most of their career, and that's perfectly fine. But you also have options to move on up the ladder in a couple different ways. So one of the most obvious ways, especially if you really love the actual forecasting of it, would be to then apply for a lead meteorologist position or a hydrologist position. And those are our 2 GS13 level careers in our weather forecast office. And that basically just means you have more responsibility. So you're going to be the shift supervisor. You're in charge. If things go crazy, you're the one that's supposed to know what to do. So just some more responsibility and a bigger salary. So then, and I'll get into the specifics of what these positions mean here on the next slide, but you can also, after that, be promoted to more of a management position, which is kind of a combo of, it's more management, but also you still have some shift work. You're still helping out with forecast oftentimes, but much less than the just straight meteorologist. And that would be a meteorologist in charge, who's like the big boss, the warning coordination meteorologist, or the science and operations officer. And then beyond that, if you have your sights set really high, you can actually then be promoted to one of our headquarters, either our regional headquarters or our national headquarters positions. And there's many types of actual meteorology jobs there, as well as more management, customer interaction jobs. Depending on what your desire is, there's lots of different options. And so this is when I talk about, having lots of options, and Rodney talked about, getting eventually to the part of the country you want to be at. There's a lot of options. As you can see here, these are all of our weather forecast offices across the country. It's like a big puzzle that fits together to cover the entire country, including like Puerto Rico and Guam, Hawaii and Alaska, all of those. And so there's options everywhere, and all of our offices are continually working with our partners, especially in the emergency management community. All right, so a little bit more about the staff if you end up working at a weather forecast office, like here in Norton. So we have 5 lead meteorologists, I mentioned, that were the shift supervisors. We have 7 meteorologists. That's the entry-level position that I talked about. That's where you would start, and you could stay, as long as you want. And then beyond that, we also have a hydrologist on staff who, currently our hydrologist is also, she started as a meteorologist, and so she does double duty. She actually worked a shift today, and she will be tomorrow on the forecast desk. So she kind of does double duty, working as kind of keeping track of our rivers in coordination with the River Forecast Center, which I'll talk about later, as well as working with the meteorologist on staff. And then you can also work for the Weather Service. You don't have to be a forecaster. Sometimes you can get hired as a hydrometeorological technician. And a lot of times these people have training from the military, and they are tasked more with helping out with our observation program, our climate sites, doing stuff like that. So that's another option as well. And then if you really, you're not exactly interested in the science of the meteorology, but you really want to work, in our office with weather equipment, that would be an electronic technician. And we have 4 of those. And so, as you can imagine, with all the technology in our office, there's always lots of things to take care of and fix. So be it our radar, different ASOS sites, our observation sites, or just all of our computer systems in the office. So lots of different variety of positions in our office. Now, next, I'm going to talk about our management positions and what those positions entail. So the big boss that I talked about is the meteorologist in charge, or the MIC, we call it. And that's where you would get to, that's the top of the food chain in each office. And so he's in charge of just kind of overseeing the whole office and everything that goes on. He also he started as a meteorologist, he or she started as a meteorologist and moved their way up. So they still have forecasting experience, and they can help out in operations when they need to. And then just below that, we have our warning coordination meteorologist and our science and operations officer. So the science and operations officer is kind of the research and training guy. He or she is the one that's in charge of kind of transferring science and research into operations, making sure that the forecasters are trained up on the latest and greatest in technology, be it interpreting the newest ways to interpret satellite or radar, the newest computer models to use, that kind of thing. So the research side, if you're interested in research, that would be more of a SOO position, we call it, Science Operations Officer. If you're interested more in kind of getting out and working with our emergency management community, that would be our WCM, Warning Coordination Meteorologist. And so they are focused mainly on coordinating with our external partners, like I mentioned. And so, if you feel more comfortable, less comfortable with the research, more comfortable with the working with people, that would be the path that you would want to shoot for. And then as far as our IT staff goes, we have the electronic systems analyst who oversees all of our IT staff and all of our electrical systems. And then we also have our ITO, the information technology officer, who really saves us a lot of times because he keeps all our computers running. And so, a lot of times I'll have to go to our ITO and say, hey, this thing is doing something weird, this computer, can you help me? And then he just fixes it somehow. He just knows. So if you're really good with computers and you want to do something like that, there's a position for you there. And then we also have our administrative support assistant, who helps with just everything in the office, budget and administrative support. So she has her hands in just about everything that we do. All right, so besides, so that's the Weather Forecast Office. But the National Weather Service also encompasses many other different types of centers, and that includes what's known as the River Forecast Centers. So if, say, you're more interested in hydrology than actual meteorology, but you kind of like both, River Forecast Centers are a good way to go. So these are regional centers, so they have much bigger areas of responsibility. You can see the one that is co-located with our office, so we work with all the time, is called the Northeast Regional Forecast, Northeast River Forecast Center. And they're tasked with forecasting for the rivers in pretty much all of New England and most of New York. And so, you see there are several different sites across the country that are options for you to work at, and you would be working closely in line with meteorologists, but also just focusing mostly on the rivers themselves. So let's say instead of a hydro buff, you're more of an aviation person. That would lead you to maybe pursue a job at the Center Weather Service Unit, the CWSU we call it. And that is a part of the Weather Service that basically is directly working in weather support for FAA personnel and connecting them to the weather forecast offices. And so each FAA Air Route Traffic Control Center has an embedded weather service weather center weather service unit. I'm jumbling my words all up tonight. Sorry about that. But each ARTCC has a weather service unit inside it, and so they work closely together with kind of connecting all of these aviation centers to the weather forecast and the weather forecast office. So they are primarily focused on the aviation community. So if that's something that you're passionate about, say you're a pilot or you are interested in flying, but you also have a love of meteorology, this would be a great place to kind of blend those two passions together, work at the Center Weather Service Unit. And this is just a zoom in on our neck of the woods, so the Boston CWSU, which is actually the star is in Massachusetts right there, but it's actually in Nashua, New Hampshire. So it's a little further north, but it basically they have 4 meteorologists on staff, and they are working directly with the FAA. They're in communication with the command center, quote unquote, in Herndon, Virginia, and it's a really busy office, especially for, as in relative to the rest of the country, averages about 5,000 plus flight operations per day. And they're always, having concerns with icing, turbulence, thunderstorms. As you know, we get some pretty severe storms up here in the winter and in the summer. And so they're always busy working, dealing with some other kind of bad weather for our airports. And so they have a very important duty. Just public safety is the main thing. So they work with the Boston Terminal Radar Approach Control, as well as the Boston Air Traffic Control Tower. So just all sorts of communications going on between them and a whole bunch of different centers across the country and the region. So very busy, but if you like a fast-paced job, that's definitely going to be one. Okay, now that center focuses directly on aviation, but that doesn't mean that if you were to say work at a weather forecast office like here in Norton, you wouldn't be doing aviation forecasts, because that's certainly still a part of the job. It's actually one of the most important parts of what we do here in Norton, is known as TAF forecast, or terminal aerodrome forecast. And these are the airport specific forecasts. An example of one you see right there in the white, that's for Boston. And these are basically forecasts out for 24 to 30 hours of wind speed, wind direction, weather, cloud ceiling heights, basically telling the airports and the airplanes coming in and out what the weather is going to be doing as they're coming in and out, whether it's safe to land or not. So very important. Say there's less than a quarter mile visibility in fog, they're going to want to know that. It's going to be very important to their operations. They may have to delay flights landing or taking off. So it's costly. It can be very costly for airports to shut down, but if it's in the interest of public safety, then they want to know it's going to happen. So we are, one of the biggest parts of our job is giving them a heads up of what to expect. All right, so another sector that we do is fire weather. So I want to address the picture down in the bottom right first. So this is actually a Weather Service employee who's known as an IMET, which stands for an incident meteorologist. And these incident meteorologists basically deploy to wildfires for up to 2 weeks at a time. And so they'll be living often in a tent for 2 weeks at a time out in the woods with the fire crew, and giving daily and more than daily weather briefings to the people that are fighting the fire to let them know what's going on. So if that's something that interests you, if you like being out in the woods, you're interested in fire weather, you might pursue a job as an incident meteorologist in the National Weather Service. They get deployed to most often to wildfires, but they can also be used for prescribed burns when people are looking for burning permits, but also most of the prescribed burns and burning permit fires, those will just get sent to us as requests for what's known as a spot forecast. So if they don't have an instant meteorologist on site, then they'll ask for a spot forecast, which is basically just a specific forecast for one area that's right where the fire is, and they want to know things like temperature, humidity, wind speed direction, the mixing height, which basically would tell them if the smoke is going to be stuck at the ground or not, or it's going to mix out really high into the atmosphere. And then especially if there's going to be lightning or windstorm coming, because that's going to lead to more fire spread. So we are especially mostly in the summer doing spot forecasts as needed whenever a fire pops up. So that's definitely a public safety issue, more so in the West, but we still do get stuff out here in New England as well. Another area that is very important for New England, especially because of how many miles of coastline we have, is our marine forecast program. So we are always working with our marine partners, Coast Guard, and also the ferries that go out to the islands, the DOT, all these people that have interests in what the seas are going to do as far as the wave heights, the wind speeds, because that can have a huge impact on the safety of the vessels that are heading out. And so we're always twice a day at least updating our marine forecast, and you can see they're split up into lots of different zones there in that colorful picture on the top left. Those are all our different zones, and so if you go to our website and click on that area of the ocean, you're going to get the forecast for that zone. So it's going to tell you things like wave height, wind speed, that kind of stuff. And then finally, we'll end it out on one of my favorite parts of the job, which is decision support services. So this you might hear if you're paying attention to us on social media or things like that. You might hear us mention DSS, and that's what this stands for, Decision Support Services. And so this is become a focus more and more with the National Weather Service over the last 5 years or so. But it's really been something that we've done all along. We just haven't really called it this, or we haven't focused quite as much. But now this is really an area that we are finding is much more important, and that's basically interpreting the forecast for our partners, especially emergency managers and other people making decisions regarding public safety. So that could be done in several ways, but mainly from the office in the form of, say, a conference call, or especially now in COVID times, we've started switching to video calls, and we really prefer that because it gives us some face-to-face time. Even though we're not in the same room as our partners, we can see them, talk to them, give them a heads up. Now, once COVID is done, we'll probably have more on-site stuff, but when that's not an issue, we do have the option to go on-site. And so for things, for instance, big events like the Boston Marathon or the July Boston Pop Show, we will send a meteorologist or two to the Emergency Operations Center, or EOC. And we're just there in case anything, weather-wise happens, if there's something significant going on in the forecast, or say there was an incident. So like with the Boston bombing, we had a meteorologist in the EOC, and so when that bombing happened, they were able to give a forecast for the wind direction because they didn't know if perhaps the smoke would contain any chemicals that could be harmful. They want to know which way it's going to blow, things like that. So another area of focus that the Weather Service is kind of going towards is this decision support services, and it is another reason that you're going to want to have good communication skills, not just the math and science, but the communicating the forecast to people is really important. So with that, I think that's our last slide, and I'll hand it back to Joe.
All right. Thanks, Bryce, and thanks, Rodney. And so before we get to your questions, which we will get to them, I was talking to Bryce and Rodney, and we thought it would just be really good to give just a quick overview of how we became interested. I think, Bryce, our stories are similar, but as I said, Rodney's is far different. So we'll let him go last. But I'll just start off. So I've been in the National Weather Service now 30 years, believe it or not. It goes quick. But I had interest in becoming a meteorologist when I was in elementary school. I think it was around third, fourth grade. I can remember just loving all sorts of weather, winter storms. I grew up here in the Northeast in the New York City area, so good winter storms, severe weather in the summertime, the occasional hurricane too. I went through Hurricane Gloria. That was probably the last one I experienced, but I just had a real love for all types of kind of extreme weather. And back then, I would watch the Weather Channel most of the time and learn from that. And as I got into high school, I learned about the National Weather Service. I thought that was pretty cool. So I wrote to the office in New York City, which was at the time located in Midtown Manhattan, and they let me come in and volunteer. So I would go in on Saturdays and sit with the forecasters and learn kind of what they did, and I just loved it. So by the time I went to college. I went to the State University of New York in Oswego, which is northwest of Syracuse. I got my degree, and I was lucky enough to get into kind of an internship program at the National Weather Service after my junior year, which was at Logan Airport in Boston, of all places. So then I went back for my senior year, and when I graduated, they had a job waiting for me. So I went on to Binghamton, New York, worked there for 5 years as an entry-level meteorologist. And then there weren't a lot of forecaster jobs at the time, so what I did was I kind of did what Rodney said. You don't always go where you expect, and I worked as a hydrologist for 2 years at the Northeast River Forecast Center, which was then in Taunton, just over the line from Norton. Did that for a couple of years, and then there were some opportunities to come back as a meteorologist, so I stayed in the Taunton office at the time, worked my way up as a meteorologist and then a lead meteorologist, and then today as science and operations officer, which was I've been doing now for about 13 years. So I was fortunate enough to kind of climb the ladder in one office. But that's kind of my quick story. But it really started in elementary school, and I think a majority of the meteorologists you talk to will have a story similar to that. So Bryce, I'll let you go next, then we'll wrap up with Rodney.
All right. So quick rundown of how I got where I am. I also, as Joe mentioned, I knew that I loved weather from probably at least fifth grade, but I didn't have a webinar like this or anybody that I really knew in the meteorology field growing up to kind of prepare me. So I I was not prepared all the way through my senior year of high school. I just kind of assumed, oh yeah, I'll go to school at UT Knoxville because I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. I was like, oh, I'll just go to UT Knoxville, get my degree and be a meteorologist. It's like, oh, and then I realized, oh, there's no schools in Tennessee that even offered meteorology degree. So I was kind of like last minute scrambling. So I was not prepared. And so eventually ended up finding a great school in Mississippi State. And so I went to Mississippi State for my undergrad, loved it, had a great experience, 4 years in undergrad. And then a little hiccup. So I tried to get an internship, basically a paid internship with the Weather Service. There was a program called SCEP that is, and I'll tell you how to kind of pursue something like this at the end. But there was a program called SCEP where you could, between your junior and senior years, you could be a intern at an office. It's kind of a low paid but paid position, and if you did that for a certain number of hours, then you would basically be placed into a Weather Service office at the end of your school career. And I was like, so I said, I'm gonna apply for this. So I applied for it and I actually got the position in Birmingham, Alabama. And so I was all ready to do this internship for the summer in Birmingham. I had a place to live for the summer. I was waiting for the WCM to call me and tell me when I could start. And, he kept saying, haven't heard yet, waiting on the budget. And so eventually, about a month into the summer, I got the call, oh, they ran out of money. They're having to cut the program, so you're not going to be able to do it. And I was just crushed. I was like, oh no, this is the worst news. But they did allow me to come for a month and just basically come every day as an unpaid volunteer. I was able to get trained to do the weather balloon, get my certification in that, just something to add to the resume. And as Joe or Rodney, I can't remember who it was, mentioned, volunteering and internships are so important for your resume. So it was nevertheless great for me to have the balloon certification as well as just the fact that I volunteered at this office. And so I, finished my undergrad, and then at the end of that, the Weather Service was in a hiring freeze because of the political climate, and so they couldn't hire anyone. And I really wanted to work for the Weather Service, so I said, well, I guess I'll go to grad school. So I went to grad school and got my master's degree in atmospheric science at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. And that was actually ended up being a great experience. It all worked out for the best because right out of grad school, I got a job with the Weather Service out in Spokane, Washington. So I moved across the country to Washington State, lived there, worked there for about 3 years. And then I applied for a promotion to our office here in Boston, or in Norton. And I've been here for about 2 years now and love it. So yeah, it's kind of a meandering path, but that's how I ended up here.
Yeah, thank you, Bryce and Joe. This is Rodney. As Joe have mentioned, I have a different path to meteorology. So a little background: I grew up in the tropics in Singapore, and I've never experienced snow in my life. And then until freshman year in college, I went to a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, and my first ever snow was actually on Halloween 2011. If you remember, some of you may remember that October 29, 2011. Very early season snowstorm, up to 20 inches in some places in towards central Mass. And that first snow really captivated me. And at that time, I was actually, being a liberal arts college, I was doing humanities. And actually, I have a double degree in philosophy and political science in college. But I knew I always loved weather. So for grad school, I applied to physical geography, and then I wrote about my love for snow. And then University of Kansas decided to take a gamble on me, and they really liked my essay, and they accepted me into the physical geography program. But then the geography program and atmospheric science program is in the same department. So one day I met with the graduate director, and he's a meteorology professor. And I told him I really like meteorology, but I'm not sure if I can do it. And he said, give it a try. And so they put me in the intermediate undergrad classes, and thankfully I have a pretty good math and science background from growing up in Singapore. So it was a little bit rusty, but I was able to get by. And then they put me in the graduate classes, and then they have me teach Meteorology 101 as a teaching assistant, and I have to do my master's thesis. So all in all, I mean, it's kind of a convoluted path, but you kind of have to be brave and take leaps of faith at time. And and when I started applying my last semester at KU, University of Kansas, the first thing I applied to as many National Weather Service offices as I could. But as I've mentioned earlier, the first cut of your application is through the Human Resources Department of federal government, and these people are not scientists or experts in meteorology. They are HR specialists, so they follow the book. I mean the rule, and so if you're missing even a physics 101, they're going to toss out your application. So that was what happened. And but the Department of Navy offered me an interview, and then I went from there. So and eventually I found my way to the National Weather Service. So it's all in all, I would say it's a non-traditional path, but if you get to where you want to go, I mean, I would say encourage you to go for it.
All right. Thanks, Rodney. And I have told you this before, out of all the interviews I've probably helped conduct over the past, good 15 years, that your story was probably the best one I've ever heard. I love it. So we're certainly happy to have you with us here at the Norton office. All right. So let's go. We have a few questions. We'll finish up. So first one, and Rodney and Bryce, you can help me answer these. From Landon, what opportunities exist for volunteer work and internships currently in meteorology, since many of these are canceled due to the pandemic? Or maybe that's a me question.
Oh, well, I forgot one thing. I wanted to point out what the new SCEP program was actually real quick.
Oh, sure.
I mentioned I had gotten a SCEP position. So that is not a thing anymore, but it basically is. It's just under a new name, and it's called Pathways. So if you Google look into a Pathways internship, that is basically what I described. It's a paid internship for at least a summer, and you would then most likely be placed into a weather service office. And so they're highly competitive. But if you are a person that is in sophomore, junior year of college right now, that's something, or even younger than that, something to keep in mind as you approach. Now with the pandemic, that throws a whole wrench into things, and I am not sure how that has affected the Pathways program, if they're still planning on taking applicants for the summer or not. I don't know that they even know. Do you know, Joe?
I believe there are still some Pathways positions, and the best place to look for that is the usajobs.gov website, which is where they're advertised. And I know when the positions are being announced, the universities are notified also. So, college students check with your advisor about that, because they do notify the meteorology departments for various schools. But those, I believe, there are still a number of them. Maybe they already passed. I'm not sure. But they usually, is it the springtime, Bryce, I think, that they come out?
Usually in the spring.
Yeah, so that's something to keep a lookout. I haven't heard too much about it lately, but those are usually scattered throughout the country, but they're paid, so definitely worth getting into. And it pretty much guarantees you a job when you graduate, which is nice. Now, let me get back to Landon's question before I forget, and I can probably answer this one. It depends on the office, Landon. Some offices I know are doing virtual kind of volunteer internships with students. At our office, we've just decided to suspend it right now. It's just difficult because we're not doing more than minimal staffing in our office. The rest of us are kind of telecommuting. So it's difficult to kind of manage the program here, where we would have a student doing some research or working on a project. It's a little harder to do without actually physically being in the office. But I know some of my fellow offices, they are doing them. So if you can do something virtual, send emails, go on the web to the various offices and send them an email and just see if they're doing anything for perhaps next summer or maybe even the spring semester. It's probably worth looking into. So there are some, I know, maybe perhaps some of the TV stations are doing them as well. Places locally like Blue Hill Observatory might be worth checking into too. So the short answer is some are doing it and some aren't. It just depends really on the office. So good question. Here's a good one, and I'm going to hand this one to Bryce from Danielle. She's currently in college for a bachelor's degree in geosciences, full-time online-only student. What do you recommend for other activities when we aren't actually able to attend college campus and clubs? That's a good question because there aren't any activities going on.
I know that is a good question.
My first guess. I'm sorry, Bryce. My first guess might be some sort of community activity, but I'll let you. I'll let you speak to that.
I would say anything that you can get any sort of leadership position is the best, because any sort of activity is going to be great, just to show you're kind of a well-rounded student. You're not you've kind of got a little bit of everything. So any sort of community organization or service organization, it may look different right now during the pandemic, but it's still going to be a good thing to have on your resume. And if you happen to have any local chapter of the AMS or NWA around, I'm not sure where you're in school, but if that is something, or a student chapter at your school, really encourage you to participate in that, because that is going to be a big part, not only to just kind of, it's a activity that's also related to meteorology, but also you can have leadership opportunities. So like you can be the vice president or the president or the treasury, just something to show that you can take initiative, can lead people. It's hard. Everything's got this grain of salt with the pandemic going on, because I'm not sure how, if these groups, I'm sure they're meeting virtually, maybe not as often, but maybe they have Zoom meetings or something. But if there's any way for you to still participate in those, then definitely try to. It's important, but again, grain of salt with the pandemic, and I'm not exactly sure how colleges nowadays are handling it. So
yeah, and just something else I thought of, Danielle, is COVID obviously is kind of a negative situation, but think of things that can turn into a positive. Maybe since you're home, if you have, maybe during a school break, volunteer, maybe start a food bank or help with a food bank, help other people. Service activities are always very big, obviously good things to do, but they can also help build your resume, show the kind of activities that you do. So that might be another option too. And also, just giving back to the community. That's always a good thing to do. So great question. All right. Bryce, I'm going to need you to Google this because I don't know offhand. From Jonathan, what is a typical starting salary for an entry-level NWS meteorologist? So I don't remember what GS5 is. I can say back when I started, it was $15,000 a year, but I think it's more now.
Oh yeah, no, I'd hope it's more. So I'm not sure about 5, and also, so one thing is it depends on where you're starting, because there is locality pay in the weather service. If you start, say, in Boston, it's going to be more than if you start in Kansas. So, but generally, I started when I was hired I started as GS7 in Spokane, and it was about 40,000. And so then you'll go up from there. Now it'll be less or more depending on where you are. And a GS5, I want to say, is probably more like 32,000 if you're starting at the very bottom. But again, if you have experience or a master's degree, you can start at a 7 or a 9, and that's going to be 40 and up.
And if you really want to know the specific, you can do an online search just through GS federal pay scale, and that'll show you.
Yes.
Based on different.
Yes, you can see exactly what they all are. Just look up 2020 GS scale.
There you go. All right, good question. Yep. Just one from Joe. Who's in charge of the social media posts? I like to say Bryce, but it's really everybody. It depends. It's part of the forecaster that's on duty. So it's kind of everybody's job, but Bryce
Yeah.
manages it, and he yells at us if there's something he doesn't like, or helps us with the training,
Yeah.
or gives us ideas. So
Nicely.
pretty much it's
Yep.
everybody. Everybody does the social media. So, but Bryce manages it. So there you go. From Josh, is a storm chaser a real job? I've been dying to chase a tornado. I would
Yeah,
assume it is.
It is a
yeah.
real job.
Maybe I will try to
They
answer this
just
question.
Yeah, go ahead, Rodney.
yeah, go for it, Rodney.
So I went to school in Kansas, and you know, it's I actually got into storm chasing a little bit myself because in a large part due to because of my meteorology 101 students. People in Kansas, they love tornadoes, and so the thing is that storm chasers, I think most of them they do it for free and for because out of their own passion. Sometimes the more prolific storm chasers, you know, they take very good photography or videos. They may be compensated by the TV stations or like the Weather Channel, but these are far and few in between. So it's like if you want to place your bets, it's you could make it a career, but you have to most likely kind of have other supplemental sources of income as well. So because it's a lot of people do it out of passion, and of course it's also a dangerous position as well, because you are going into a very dangerous environment for weather. So there are a lot of things to consider.
All right. So I guess the short answer is it can be.
Very few and far between, but can be.
They're there. Okay. Question from Rohan. This is a good one. If you do undergrad in computer science and then do a master's in meteorology, would you still be eligible or competitive in NWS meteorology jobs and meteorology jobs in general? And the answer to that is yes. As long as you have the basic education requirements, which can either be done as an undergrad or a graduate student, you are eligible. So you could even do undergrad meteorology and masters in computer science or any of the physical sciences usually will count, as long as you have some sort of atmospheric science. So that's a good question, but yes, you would be eligible. From Ethan, is there a particular time where it's too late, as in, is there a point where afterwards it becomes improbable to find jobs because of missed experience? I'll answer this, guys. I would say no. I've worked with people who went out, from college, didn't go right into meteorology, did another job, then finally got a job maybe in the private sector, and then after a few years got into the National Weather Service. So it's not. I think you have to be persistent, and you have to really kind of sell yourself in your resume and hopefully in an interview. But I wouldn't say there's a particular time where it's too late to find a job because you didn't have experience maybe when you were still in school. It's a little harder, but certainly it's not impossible. Anything to add, Bryce, on that? I don't. Okay.
No, I think you covered
That's
it.
probably it. All right. Just a couple more from Duncan. Do you ever get to go up in a plane if you're in the airport tower jobs? No, you don't. And I think you're probably talking about the Center Weather Service unit. You don't work, directly for the airlines. Years ago, the Weather Service forecasters used to actually get to do ride-alongs in aircraft. You'd ride up in the cockpit in the jump seat and get to talk to the pilots and kind of understand their weather needs. But that got suspended with 9/11, unfortunately. But in the Center Weather Service unit, you do interact with the controllers and the supervisors there. But yeah, no, we don't get to go. We don't get the benefit of getting to go up in planes anymore, unfortunately. But good question. And from Josh, let's see. As a freshman in high school, is there anything I could participate in? Bryce, you want to hit that one?
Sure. It depends on where you are, but I mentioned before the local chapters of the AMS and the NWA, they often will have not just college chapters, but some places will have local chapters that are just for the members of the community, so you would be able to attend or be a part of those. So look into the AMS chapter and see if there's anything around you that you could participate in. I would say that's good, but really, in high school, just any sort of extracurricular in the community, to help you kind of just get some experience working with people, anything to work with people, and to show that you're, like I said, kind of well-rounded. In high school, it's not as important. You're just trying to make sure that you're getting the courses that are going to prepare you well for the degree, but the extracurriculars, still would help you get into a good college, and then down the line can still just help you in your career. So anything to show leadership is good, I think.
Okay. Yeah, good advice. All right, and our last question, we thank everyone for hanging around. I know we're running a little more than an hour. From Sydney, what are the best colleges to study meteorology near the Rhode Island area? Let me see if I can rattle off a few. I would say you've got, I don't know if anything specifically in Rhode Island itself. URI, I know. I don't know if they have a meteorology program. I know they've involved in research, but URI is a possibility. In Massachusetts, you've got UMass Dartmouth on the south coast is one. You've got Bridgewater State, I believe, offers some meteorology courses. Of course, UMass up in Lowell has an undergrad and graduate program. University of Connecticut also offers a program. If you go a little further west, the University at Albany, State University of New York, there's a number of campuses: Albany, Oneonta, Oswego, Brockport, Stony Brook on Long Island as well. So those are the ones off the top of my head. Bryce or Rodney, do you want to add any more?
Yeah, sure, Joe.
I'll defer to you and Rodney.
Yeah, I think, Joe, you mentioned most of them, but I think up in New Hampshire, there's Plymouth State, and let's see,
Linden State up in northeast Vermont. Yeah.
I think UMass Lowell as well.
Yeah, Lowell we have. Yeah, Plymouth State I should mention. We have a number of our staff who graduated from there. I believe those are the ones off the top of my head. There are a fair number here in the Northeast, so a good online search will also help you, Sydney. But if you have any questions, certainly drop me an email and I can help you out. So that looks like all the questions. And if you think of something later, I know we have a number of students on here. Feel free to drop me an email if you have any questions, especially anywhere, elementary school up to college. If you have a question about anything we presented tonight, or if you think of something later, or down the road you want to just contact someone in the National Weather Service, you have my email address. Please feel more than free to contact me. I'm happy to help, and I'm also happy to help for college students to review your resume and maybe a cover letter. If you're looking at the National Weather Service, we can help tailor it to what we normally look for. So with that, I want to thank Bryce and Rodney for joining me tonight on our webinar on how to become a meteorologist. Hope everybody enjoyed it, and we will have this on our YouTube channel a little bit later if you want to go back and watch. So